Hello and welcome back to DriveDriverDriven. We're back on the MK project, and as promised, we're working on the roll cage. Now, with my kit, I have optioned the roll bar or the optional sports bar and the FIA cage. There's a few things that you'll need to do to fit both of them and make sure that the chassis and the body is ready. And so today what we're doing is we're getting the cage in place, and we're going to start prepping the chassis for, I guess, locating the bolts that fix the cage to the chassis. I'll spin the camera around and show you what I'm talking about. I've already done the hard part of swapping the cage on. There's really nothing to it as far as swapping between the two. I have the optional sports bar here. You can see the lower pickup points, and then these saddle pads go here on the chassis across the rear bulkhead. The only bit of difficulty really is just how kind of awkward the FIA cage is. It's not heavy by any stretch. It's just awkwardly proportioned. There's, not really a good place for one person to grab a hold of things and set it into place. And then down here where these bolts go through is a little tight when you're swapping back and forth. And you can widen those out a bit, but the second you cinch those bolts down, it's going to close up and make swapping between them a little bit difficult. So really putting the FIA cage on is a two-man job, and I would suggest two people to do it. If you're just moving it around the garage or into storage or whatever, moving it around with one person is not too bad at all. The things you need to prepare for with the FIA cage here, you have the normal fixing points here where they're already set and drilled and ready to bolt in. However, up in the front, you can see I've already done these front ones on each side, but there are a few more fixings. There's a second bolt here for the front. There's these two in the middle. And what you need to do is line this all up so that not only does it go through this little saddle mount here, but it has to go through the panel, this little flat section, and not through the tube or somewhere else. So lining that up is a bit tricky. And as you can see, there's not a whole lot of overlap to work with between this guy and this panel back here. On this rear one, it's a little bit easier. There seems to be quite a bit more overlap, so I don't think that'll be a problem. If we go around to the other side, you can see it's a similar story where getting this area to line up is going to be kind of in the forward section here to line up through the panel in the middle. And then this guy, again, just like on the other side, lines up fairly well, and we'll be able to send a bolt through. I've mentioned before how well MK packages their hardware, how well they label everything. And in fact, all of the roll cage hardware came labeled in a bag. And what I've done is separate it out by size and location. So these are the missing bolts that go through our rear bulkhead area that I didn't install. This guy is one of the larger aluminum slugs or spacers that goes up near the front of the cage, and again, the associated hardware. And then on the sides, they take a smaller size, and again, smaller associated hardware to run it through, which is good because I think we'll have to thread the needle a little bit when we get this installed. Kind of another top tip when you're organizing everything is I like these kind of utility cases. It made a lot of sense for me when we were organizing the hardware. You can see what we've done with these bags is they're all nicely labeled. put them all in the bin so they're easy to find. Again, M8 hardware, M12 hardware, etc. Everything's well situated. And these cases are cheap enough that it just makes sense from an organizational standpoint. And then when you're done with the build, you can always use this for extra parts, spares, other bolts, etc. So it's just kind of a nice little setup. This is kind of a weird angle, but what I want to demonstrate is how I transferred these holes onto the chassis from the cage here using a transfer punch. You could also just put a little bit of black Sharpie or marker or a paint pen on the end of the bolt and send it through. But either way, what we need to do is we need to transfer the location of this hole here into the chassis on the back side. And we want to make sure that we get it nice and straight because, again, all of this stuff has to be lined up later to send a bolt through. And it doesn't have to be super precise, but if you don't want to round out the holes or make anything bigger than it needs to be, because again, this is for safety. So what I've got is I've got our spacer here, and we're going to send it up and in between. And then this is a transfer punch. And we're just going to send that guy in. And we're going to line it up kind of in the middle of the hole. I'll show in a moment the hole is elongated to give a little bit of fore-aft movement. But really what's important is we just want to make sure that it's perpendicular to the surface because that's just going to make life easier to line it up. Then we're just going to give the transfer punch a tap, which will put a mark on the panel. We can withdraw the punch and the spacer. And then we have a spot that we can drill to get that bolt in. Now I'm going to start with a smaller size here. Again, we just want to get the hole started. We can always make it bigger later. And now that we have our initial hole, we can widen it out to the size that we actually need. All right, and now that we're through, we can put our spacer and our nut and bolt into place and just verify that everything lines up like it's supposed to. Now we're not going to tighten this down super tight. I've kind of cinched down the front ones here on each side, but I don't want to cinch these ones down until we get the rest of them done. So now that you've seen one of them done, I'm going to put you in time lapse and go through and do the rest of these. Not much of a visual difference, but all of our bolts are in. You can see we got our spacers in between the kind of exo cage thing and the chassis. Really, all of it was pretty straightforward. These lined up okay. This one lined up just fine. This one on each side is a little bit tricky because you can see down in there, it's sort of towards the bottom of the triangle, and placement inside of this saddle is a little weird. But yeah, other than that, everything else is pretty straightforward, pretty easy to manage. It's really nothing of a job. I think the hardest bit is actually just getting the cage onto the chassis. So that being said, now that we have these holes drilled, we can start on our body pre-fit. So I'm going to take the cage off. We're going to set it aside. We'll start pulling the body panels out, starting at the rear and working our way forward. So give me a moment and we'll get that going. Back to street mode now. We've got the roll hoop, or the sport roll hoop, back on and bolted in. Did a little cleanup, just put some tools away so that we could really get ready for the next step. Now, we have to do a little bit of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because normally by now you would have already installed the rear differential, you would have already installed the suspension front and rear, and then you would have to do the fuel tank install, and then you would get into the body pre-fit. So that brings us to the fuel cell then. I figure we might as well put that in because we are going to have to cut a hole in the rear panel assembly for the fuel filler. And well, we need the tank in order to figure out where that location is going to be. So I've already prepped the chassis. Now, these little strips aren't included. This is just some high density foam that I've had from previous projects. I just put it down on the chassis rails to sort of protect the tank, protect the chassis, give it a little bit of support, mainly so that the tank itself doesn't wear through. And then on the tank side, of course, you can see that I am not using the MK sports tank. I have a history of vehicle fires. I completely believe in safety, and there is already a video out, and I'll put in a clip here of a 7 that got rear-ended in a race and engulfed the whole car on fire because it wasn't running a fuel cell. How these differ from a regular tank is, besides the aluminum can that you can see, there's actually a bladder inside that is both fire resistant and burst resistant. So in the case of an accident where someone hits this tank, which by the way is the back of the car, it won't burst under pressure. And if the can ruptures, if something pierces or tears the aluminum of the can, the bladder inside will resist that as well. So chances are very low that any fuel will come out one way or another. In my case, I had an engine blow in the Ultima that sent engine parts through oil lines and water lines, and the entire engine bay was engulfed in fire. And one of these tanks for the Ultima was in the middle of fire for the better part of 20 to 30 minutes and did not rupture. And in fact, that's the only reason I was able to rebuild that car. So I very much believe in fuel cells, fuel safety, and I did not skimp on safety for this build either. So that being said, you can choose to use the MK tanks. They will work. This is the same dimension. I mentioned before, I matched dimensions from MK. And in fact, this one's actually a hair smaller volumetrically than the MK tank would be. But otherwise, the outside dimensions are identical. So we shouldn't have any problem bolting that in place. The other change that I made because of the implementation of this fuel cell is I'm running an internal fuel pump with feed and return and vent here on the top plate in the middle. Our fill neck has an anti-rollover valve, so does our vent actually. And then I have a built-in fuel sender, which I will have to verify matches the gauge now that I think about it. But otherwise, we should be able to utilize the same mounts that MK provide. Now, these are the new mounts. Previously, you would just have a metal strap that went up and over the tank. These ones actually bolt this C channel on top, and then you have to drill holes in the chassis in the corners, and then everything straps down. So first steps first, let's drill these holes for these rods. Then we can set the tank in place and bolt it down. Tank installation done. I'll fiddle with it a little more, but again, because this isn't the MK tank, there are minor differences. So normally with the MK setup, you would set it up center. Mine's a little off to the passenger side or off to the right side. And that's because the filler neck here isn't pushed all the way out to the edge. It's actually inset a little bit. So I just need enough room for the tube to come up and into the filler neck. So that's why it's offset a little bit. Otherwise, you can see the foam got crushed down here. That's fine. We have our straps in. Everything's held nice and tight. One thing you'll want to watch for is in the back here where your brake lines are run. I'm going to fiddle with this a little more off camera and bring the tank forward some. Basically just to give the brake line a little more room, and then put probably like a piece of tubing or some protective covering on the brake line itself so that it doesn't abrade back here. That's basically my biggest worry. The other side you can see looks fine there, so I'm not too worried about this. Now you can choose to run the MK tank yourself. It's your skin. You could do whatever you want. The fuel safe tank is quite a bit more. So this tank and these plans are available from Fuel Safe in the USA. I'll try and put the information in the description down below. So if you do want one of these tanks, you can reach out to them and they can work with you and fit you into the pipeline. It's not instant. They don't have these on the shelf. You'll have to wait for them to be fabricated, and your mileage may vary as to what that timeline looks like. It just depends on how busy they are. With that done, now we can work on getting the rear end or rear tub pre-fit on the car. So I'm going to grab that really quick and we're just going to set it into place.